In the last 3 videos, we have spoken a lot about boundaries. We discussed the fundamentals of boundaries, the psychology of boundaries, and the excuses that people give when they don't want to set boundaries. In this video, we are going to be talking about how exactly to set boundaries, because it's very easy, as I said in the very beginning, for people to be like, just set boundaries, just set healthy boundaries, just say no. And if you've been paying attention, you have realized that setting boundaries is not as easy as saying no. So in this video, we're going to be addressing how exactly do you set boundaries. The first thing that you need to do for you to set a healthy boundary is identify why exactly you're setting the boundary. Ask yourself, what is it that you will no longer tolerate in the relationship and why? Because if you don't know why you're setting a boundary, when you get pushback for setting that boundary, you're going to be swayed. You're going to find yourself apologizing for the boundary. So you have to have a very strong why that fuels your need to set the boundary. If you don't have that, you're going to struggle with enforcing the consequences of the boundary. So think about what makes you feel resentful, what makes you feel disrespected, what makes you feel uncomfortable, and what makes you feel resentful when it comes to the relationship you're in. Those are going to be the indicators that you're supposed to be setting a boundary. The second step is to think about your emotional weaknesses when it comes to setting boundaries. And these emotional weaknesses can be fear, shame, guilt, the things that you usually feel when you set a boundary. You need to identify these things early in advance and set up a mitigation plan for them so that when they happen after you've set a boundary, you will not feel the need to take back your boundary. For example, if every time you set a boundary, you feel guilty for setting that boundary, you need to prepare in advance and think about, if I feel guilty for setting this boundary, what will I do? Will I go talk to a friend? Will I journal? Will I do a breathing technique? Will I have positive self-talk to help me deal with the guilt that I'm feeling because of setting this boundary? What exactly will you do when the emotions come up after you've set a boundary? That is an important aspect of boundary setting. If you don't have this mitigation plan already set up before you set the boundary, you are going to find it hard to hold on to your boundary when people react in a way that makes you feel guilty, or when people do things that trigger your emotional weaknesses. Step 3 is to anticipate people's reactions and their pushback, the humiliation, the guilt tripping, the shaming, I'm your parent, I brought you into this world, I can take you out of it. Those things are going to happen. For you to set a healthy boundary, you will need to anticipate this so that when it happens, it does not shock you and it does not throw you off your path of setting a healthy boundary. It doesn't make you decide to take back the boundary because people have reacted in a funny way to your boundary. As I said, step 1, identify the reason why you're setting the boundary. Step 2, think about your emotional weaknesses. And step 3, anticipate the reactions that people are going to have to your healthy boundary. So that when you set the boundary, these things do not come as a shock. It's things you're already prepared for and you already know what to do. Step 4 is to clearly communicate what your boundary is and the consequences that will come up if that boundary is violated. Don't give a suggestion, don't beat around the bush, don't communicate the boundary like you're just saying something in passing. This is the part where you clearly communicate the boundary and clearly communicate the consequences of violating that boundary. Here's an example. If you have a friend who you usually tell things to and they end up telling somebody else those things and it's things you've told them in confidence, if you were to set a boundary with them about their behavior of telling other people the things that you've told them, this is how that conversation would go. Hey, you're my friend, but I don't like it when you tell other people things that I have told you in confidence. Every time you do that, it makes me feel that you're violating my privacy. If you continue telling people things I have told you in confidence, I will stop talking to you about the things that I don't want other people to know. Now you've communicated the boundary and you've communicated the consequences of violating that boundary. This is an important part of the process because you don't want to bring up the consequences of the boundary the moment they violated the boundary, because they're going to feel like you're punishing them for something they didn't know. You tell people in advance what is going to happen if they do something wrong, so that when they do something wrong, they know what they're doing and that there's consequences to that behavior. The next step is, when they violate the boundary, enforce the consequences that you spoke about in the previous step. If you don't enforce those consequences, they are going to assume that your boundary was just a suggestion and there's nothing you're going to do about them violating your boundary. Take the example you just used about you telling your friend things in confidence and them going to tell other people about it. If they go ahead and tell somebody something that you told them in confidence, you have to enforce the consequences that you said. You said you were going to stop telling them things that you didn't want them to tell other people. Do exactly that. If you don't do it, people are going to continually violate your boundary. And this is the part that people struggle with the most. Every time people do something wrong, you forgive them, you excuse their behavior, you find a reason why their behavior was justified. If they violate a boundary that you had, you start accepting the excuses for violating your boundary. That is the part where people keep asking, how do I set a boundary without feeling bad? The reason that people feel bad is because enforcing a boundary is difficult to work. Most people don't want to struggle with the emotional labor that comes with enforcing the consequences of the boundary violation. Enforcing your boundary is the missing step in your boundary setting. Healthy boundaries come with enforcement. Without enforcement, it is not a boundary, it is not even a healthy boundary at all. Boundaries are not requests, and the big difference between a boundary and a request is that a boundary comes with consequences that will be enforced if you violate the particular boundary. If you're not ready to deal with the consequences of setting boundaries, if you're not ready to enforce the consequences of boundary violation, then I don't think you're ready to start setting boundaries. If you're waiting for everybody in your life to get comfortable with you setting boundaries or to get comfortable with your boundaries, then you're continuously going to struggle, because there's never going to come a time when everybody is at a consensus that there's a boundary that you need to set. People already have their own issues, they have their own interests that they need to pursue. And if you're waiting for their approval for you to set a boundary, then you will never set boundaries. If you struggle with setting boundaries, let me know which part of these steps is most difficult for you. Is it the thinking about why you need boundaries? Is it the part where you need to enforce the boundary? Is it the part where you need to communicate the boundary? Is it the part where you need to communicate about the consequences of the boundary being violated? What you're going to do if people violate your boundaries? Is that the most difficult part for you? Which is the most difficult part for you? Let me know in the comment section, and let's discuss the challenges that come with setting boundaries. If you have become a boundary king, a boundary queen, you've become completely comfortable with setting boundaries, let me know how you got to that place. Share your experience in the comment section. What was your journey like? How did you start? What did you learn? What have you learned up to now that you think you can share with other people that they can use in their own life to set healthy boundaries? That is a good thing to share with people so that we can all learn from each other. If you have any questions about psychology, about mental health, about boundaries, you can send them to me on my email, or you can leave them in the comment section of this video. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. Share this with a friend. Let them know how to set boundaries. Have a good one. Take care of yourself and take care of your mental health.